More than 700 people were arrested in New York when they tried to hold a rally on the Brooklyn Bridge. New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg is one of the first U.S. officials to react to the protests.
But you're just not going to break the law, and you're not going to be allowed to keep other people from moving around, and we'll enforce the law. Yes, miss.
But the remarks come as no surprise, with Bloomberg being the 13th richest person in the U.S., with an estimated $18.1 billion in wealth. The U.S. President Barack Obama has described the protests as symptoms of frustration over the economic situation. Some analysts say this movement is not about Democrats blaming the Republicans or vice versa, but about working-class Americans standing up for their rights. Many protesters hope the current movement would grow in size and strength to force the U.S. political system to heed to their calls.
I want to see this grow. Our country is being taken over by a small minority of people who rig the system, all in their favor, and it's got to stop.
Even here at Press TV, when we wanted to get some of the updated versions of what's going on, for example, in New York or in Washington, that footage wasn't really available. Now, what does that show in terms of how the media is handling, if you can?
Well, I think it's abundantly clear that the news media in this country, the corporate news media, reflects corporate interests. It's that simple. All you have to look at is the fact that ranging from Fox to CNN, these protests are largely being spun the same way. And it seems to me that when you look at how the media aided and abetted some of the false stories that were circulated about 9/11 and some of the false pretexts that were offered by the Bush administration for why we invaded Iraq and Afghanistan, it's very clear that the news media is quite complicit in this whole situation that is going on with international bankers and with the Zionist lobby, the very people who control American domestic and foreign policy. It all goes back, I think, to something that happened in 1956 when the late Ambassador Joseph P. Kennedy, the father of the 35th President of the United States, was trying to get his son Jack elected eventually to the American presidency. And in a meeting in Palm Beach, Florida, with a New York industrial executive by the name of DeWest Hooker, they discussed what would have to be done to get Jack Kennedy elected. And DeWest Hooker told my colleague Michael Collins Piper before Hooker's death that, in fact, Joseph P. Kennedy said that if Jack Kennedy was elected, he would eventually use his burgeoning political power to end the Rothschild-dominated Federal Reserve Board. I think that had a lot to do with what happened on November the 22nd, 1963. It explains what continues to happen in the American political process.
Okay, let me talk about the U.S. political system. What do you think about that?
Well, I feel, it's been quite interesting being on Wall Street for several weeks. Most of the young people there feel the U.S. political system has absolutely nothing to do with them, with their lives. They couldn't be less interested. They don't trust anyone. They don't believe them. I absolutely agree with that. People who are representing in this political system are representing capital largely. And I do want to distance myself from Mark Dankoff. I don't think the problem is international bankers, which is just a code word for being anti-Semitic, or Zionist lobby. Certainly the U.S. supports Israel, but Mark and I are not in the same movement here. I just want to be very clear about that. There is a populist movement in this country, perhaps, for sure. We'll see where it falls out as far as left and right. But clearly the people protesting in Wall Street at this point have not figured out where they stand. They come not necessarily from the left or the right, but they are righteously angry about the level of greed and corruption that they see, and the fact that, as they put it, 1% of the population is making all the decisions and making all the profit off of the rest of the 99%. And they certainly seized on something very real here, not just in the United States, but the globe over.
Sir, but tell us why it is that people have lost faith in both political parties. And I know that you have some views about the upcoming presidential election.
Well, I think the interesting thing is that a really solid third political party in this country has never gotten off the ground. Ballot access laws are a part of that. Those are controlled by both the Republican and Democratic parties and the secretaries of state that they control in the individual states. You also have a situation where third-party candidates are not given an opportunity to have their views known within corporate news media to wide percentages of the American public. Corporate money is also denied to these third-party candidates that have any degree of independence from what's been going on. That's a good percentage of the problem here. I'd also like to respond to something that Sarah had to say. It seems to me that when we look at the difficulties that have happened in the United States in the last 10 years, I'm reminded of something that happened when my brother and I were talking about the election results of 2008. My brother is a common pleas court judge in the state of Ohio. He's a liberal Democrat. He was solidly behind Barack Obama. Steve is someone who has a lot of the same concerns that our other guests have for what's happening with our economy. I said to my brother privately when he was extolling the virtues of Barack Obama as a wonderful alternative to people like John McCain and George W. Bush, whom I also have no use for, by the way, I pointed out to him the fact that Rahm Israel Emanuel, then Mr. Obama's incoming chief of staff and a former member of the Israeli Defense Forces, had received more political action committee money when he was in the United States Congress than literally anyone else in the House of Representatives, taking money in mass numbers from the very banks and brokerage firms who were the direct recipients of this bailout money. I'm going to suggest that there is an issue here that involves Jewish control of the news media, Jewish control of the American political process, Jewish control, disproportionate Jewish control of the international banking system through the Federal Reserve Board, and an Israeli-driven American foreign policy. That is at the key to what's going on here and what has been going on in the United States for a little less than 100 years at least. And I am not an anti-Semite or a racist, but I insist that this is the core of the problem. And until we acknowledge that this is the core of the problem, we're simply, those of us on both left and right, are going to be tap dancing around this whole situation.
What are Americans to wake up based on what we're seeing?
Well, this is a tremendously exciting development that hundreds of thousands of people are waking up. There, many thousands are in the street taking actions, and future actions are coming in the days ahead. That's important. But it is important to recognize that the U.S. is not a democracy where all the people make decisions. There is a tiny handful at the very top who have always been the decision makers and the rulers. So in that sense, it's not at all a democracy. I think it's important for us, and in this new movement, to separate ourselves from voices like Mark Dancroft, who are racist, anti-Semitic, and divisive, because our strength will be in our unity, in building solidarity with the struggles and peoples of the world, in building solidarity among people here. That policy is set in Wall Street, not Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv is an adjunct to U.S. policy in the Middle East. Yes, it is a war machine that oppresses the Palestinian people, but the policies come from Wall Street, from a tiny handful who have investments in many, many other countries, and also carry out disastrous policies here at home. And what the awakening that's going on is really an example of the strength of international solidarity.
The awakening, so if there's an American awakening, and since we talked about the 1% that's dictating the lives of these people in America who are awakened, what are they going to do to sabotage, maybe I shouldn't use that word, what are they going to do to stop this awakening of spreading and taking place for it to have results? Quickly, if you can.
I think maybe sabotage is the right word, and it seems to me that whether you're looking at the Arab Spring revolutionary movements, which exist for some very, very understandable reasons, or you're looking at what's happening in the United States, there's going to be an attempt and will be an attempt on the part of the very forces that in many cases these ladies correctly identify to co-opt these movements and to infiltrate them and to put false spins on them in the news media. I think the other thing that we have to be aware of is a false flag situation either in the Middle East or in the United States or in Europe that will start a third world war and divert people's attention away from these very real political and economic interests that they're trying to raise up in protest, and divert us once again into a complete catastrophe that I will continue to insist is backed by all of the usual suspects who are represented disproportionately by the very group of people that I've had the courage to identify, where I think both of the other guests are in a perpetual state of Freudian denial.